Let's do another example of constructing a cladogram in order to produce a phylogenetic tree. So here's another chart of characteristics. You'll notice this is really similar to the last example. We've got a backbone, hinged jaw, forelimbs. We have a couple of different traits as well. And then you'll also notice that the organisms we're looking at are quite similar. Now remember, the first thing you want to do is determine your outgroup. So these are individuals that don't share any of the characteristics that you're looking at, but are related and may have other characteristics in common with this group. So just like the last example, our outgroup is going to be the lancet. So we'll put him there. Remember that this node here indicates a common ancestor, and then this lineage has diverged and become the lancelet at the end of that group. So now let's move on by looking at which organisms have the next characteristic that we are interested in. So this chart is really nice in that it has everything ordered, basically in order. We can just go down and add everything. But if this wasn't so nicely ordered, you would have to find the individual that has the next trait when nobody else does. Or there might be two individuals that have that particular trait when nobody else does. So if we look at this lamprey, we see that he has a backbone, but he doesn't have any of these other traits. Now everybody after him also has a backbone. So that means that he's the next one on our tree. So there's our lamprey. Now because everybody else has a backbone, we also need to hang our backbone on this tree to indicate that everybody after the development of this backbone is going to have one. Moving on. The next trait, the one that is shared by the next level of individuals, is going to be our hinged jaw. Now, if we look at this tuna, we're going to see that the tuna has the backbone and the hinged jaw. It doesn't have any of these traits, and then it has a dorsal fin. So we're going to ignore the dorsal fin for just a minute, and we're going to come back to that. So let's add our tuna because he is the next one that has one of these traits, but none of the others. And of course that trait is the hinged jaw. So we're going to just continue on using our chart to add our individuals. So the next is going to be the salamander, with the forelimbs. Now remember, everybody after this is also going to have forelimbs. Now, if we look at the dolphin, we have this little star here. Now, this star is telling us that dolphins may not obviously have four limbs, but if you look at their embryonic structures, they have four limbs that sort of become their flippers and their tail. So even though the adult doesn't have four limbs, at some stage in the development of this organism, the four limbs are present, and that's where we see those limbs in that organism, which is why we can say that the dolphin has four limbs, even though it may not be readily apparent. Our next trait is amnion. Now this means basically that these organisms develop in an egg. So this might be an egg with a shell, or it might be an egg inside mother like we see in mammals. Then we have milk. So this is one of the characteristics of mammals, that they have milk. Some others use milk to feed their young. Others include hair, things like that. And then finally we have our dolphin. Oops. New trait that has appeared in the dolphin is the dorsal fin. Now, let's go back though, because remember we have the tuna with the dorsal fin as well. So this is a new characteristic that pops up when we get to the tuna. And we could have looked at this characteristic in two ways. We could have said that the dolphin and the tuna are more closely related because of that dorsal fin. So we could have potentially put the dolphin off of this as an offshoot of the tuna because of the presence of the dorsal fin. But the reason that we don't is that the leopard and the dolphin share more characteristics than the dolphin and the tuna. And if you think about it, dolphins and leopards are mammals, so there are many, many more characteristics that they have in common than just these characteristics on the chart. And if you think about the differences between a mammal and a fish, there are many more differences than there are similarities. So even though there's one trait this dorsal fin, additionally, that sort of unifies the dolphin and the tuna. Those are actually very different structures in those organisms. Now, this can come about due to something called convergence, which is where individuals who don't share a common ancestor have similar structures. The other thing that could happen is something called a reversal, and this is where you have an evolutionary change that takes you back to an ancestral characteristic. Now, in this case, this is actually convergence. The only way that you can really determine this is to look at the DNA structures to see if the DNA sequences are actually similar because they are common ancestors, or if they're very different DNA structures, and those structures on the organism are coming up due to a very different genetic pathway.